Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece for Reason to Resist on February 11th, 2025. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Professor Karim Batash. Karim is an assistant professor for the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's also the co-host of BetBeat Media, which provides an anti-imperialist leftist lens on global affairs. And he joins me today from Hong Kong. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karim.
My pleasure, brother. My pleasure.
So, Karim, shortly after Bashar al-Assad was deposed in Syria, some prominent geopolitical analysts in the alternative media reacted negatively to the fact that certain factions in Palestine and in the broader Arab world celebrated the downfall of Assad. And in the course of commenting on this, these analysts made sort of generic references to the Arabs in a very critical way. One of those analysts was Scott Ritter. As you and I discussed on your program, BetBeat Media, months ago, we had a discussion about Ritter's commentary at the time, and we didn't just talk about Ritter, there were others as well. And in that discussion, we took Scott to task for the sort of generalizations that he incorporated into his critique. Well, Scott's at it again, and one of the reasons I invited you onto the program, as you know, was to get your reaction to Scott Ritter's latest commentary. But before I ask you about this, I want to clarify, from my perspective, Karim, and for the benefit of our audience, this is not personal to Scott Ritter or any particular person. I think this is about principle. And I'm going to focus on Scott Ritter's commentary only because Scott has a large following and is quite influential. But his sentiments are by no means confined to his commentary. You can find many people of lesser stature and some of comparable stature who are expressing similar sentiments. And frankly, I'm fed up with it. So let's get right to it. I'm going to read the latest post from Ritter in this regard, and I'm going to ask you to comment on this, Karim. So this is a post on X from February 5th, 2025. And this is just after the world learned of the Donald's notorious plan to, as he put it, clean out Gaza. And Scott Ritter wrote as follows. Regarding Trump's plan for Gaza, this is what happens when the Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world fail to speak with a single voice about the issue of a Palestinian state. This is what happens when you empower a simp like Abu Mazen, who makes common cause with Israel. This is what happens when you let 9 million Zionists dictate the terms of coexistence to 473 million Arabs. If the Arab world won't defend the Palestinians' right to a homeland, this is what happens. When Abu Mazen criticizes Hamas, this is what happens. This is what happens when 2 million Gazans put the Arab world to shame by resisting Israeli genocide for 15 months. Egypt could say no, Jordan could say no, Saudi Arabia could say no, the Gulf Arab states could say no, and some might. But they don't mean it because they don't believe in Palestine, and that is the crux of the problem. So I'm just throw it over to you, Karim. What is your overall reaction to this commentary?
Yeah, what can I say? I have to admit that that I find this kind of classification of the whole situation very problematic, and again because it seems to generalize the Palestinians. Or like last time it was the Arabs, this time it's the Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world. And of course, some will say, yeah, but that's not what he means. He means the Palestinian Authority, or he means the leaders, this and that. So, but that brings me to the point that I've discussed before as well, and I call that Western or even white anti-imperialism, and that is the idea that we in the West somehow are in a position to judge Arabs or people in West Asia for their own oppression, and I think that is one of the biggest arrogance. That is such an arrogance that we have in the West, that we, coming from the imperial core, can state what the Arabs do wrong and what they should do better to avoid being oppressed by our governments. And that is something people do not realize that. They, in my opinion, they have to really think about that. That how arrogant and even supremacist that position is. When Scott Ritter is talking about Arabs or Palestinians in such a degrading way, who have suffered a genocide now for more than 1 year, and they have suffered the genocide by bombs coming from his so-called democratically elected government. Who is he? Who are we in the West to tell what the Palestinians do wrong and that they are to blame for the imperialism done by our governments? That is something that frustrates me so much. And it's a form of racism, in my opinion. Racism is not just that you say bad things about people. Oh, you're black, or you're an Arab, or this or that. That is not racism. Real racism is the insidious form of invisible racism that a lot of people have without realizing it. That you can think that you can just judge the victims of genocide, in this case it's the Palestinians or the Arabs, in such a generalizing way. While in my opinion, we are to blame so much more than any people in West Asia. Yeah, I think that's a very, very big issue in the anti-imperialist sphere in the West.
Yeah, I completely agree, Karim, and I have to say, I just want to focus for a second on his comments about the so-called lack of Palestinian unity. First of all, last year, as I'm sure you're aware, the Chinese government admirably mediated a détente, shall we say, amongst the various Palestinian factions. Now, that may or may not have resulted in practical changes, but in theory, they were unified after this Chinese government mediated discussion, which I believe took place in China itself. But more to the point, Karim, I was in Lebanon numerous times last year, and I went to Palestinian refugee camps, and I spoke to Palestinians there. I spoke to people who were representatives in the camps of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I went to the occupied West Bank last year. I spoke to people who were sympathetic to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I spoke to people who were sympathetic to Hamas. I spoke to people who weren't sympathetic to any particular group when I visited Amman last year. And the overall impression that I had, Karim, and I heard this sentiment over and over again, we are unified, we are one resistance movement. This isn't about factions. I heard that from representatives of all of these organizations and people who weren't affiliated with any of these organizations. The obstacle to true unity amongst the Palestinians is a US and Israeli-backed tyrant by the name of Mahmoud Abbas, who is armed and funded and protected by the West, and principally the United States government and the genocidal Israeli entity. He has no democratic legitimacy. He was never put there in that position by the people of Palestine, occupied Palestine. He is there simply by means of brute force, and he's enabled to impose his will on the Palestinian people because of the United States and Israel. So who are we, sitting in the comfort of our homes in the West, to criticize the Palestinians for their so-called lack of unity? I just find that, with all due respect to Scott Ritter, really offensive. And, you could say the same thing, of course, about any of the tyrants in the Arab world. You could say the same thing about Sisi. Sisi receives what, like $1 billion a year of US military aid? The man is a sadistic psychopath. I mean, Human Rights Watch has documented, US-based Human Rights Watch, that he is running what they described as a torture assembly line, where he's literally killing and torturing his opponents every single day. This man is backed by the US, and we're going to sit in the comfort of our homes in the West and criticize the Egyptians for being ruled by this man? We could say the same thing about the Jordanian autocrat. We could say the same thing about the Saudi crown prince. The day that Scott Ritter takes up arms, goes to Egypt, goes to Jordan, goes to the West Bank, and puts his life on the line, as many people in the region have done, to try to remove these tyrants from power. The day he does that, perhaps then he'll be entitled to criticize the Arabs, as he puts it, or the Palestinians, for not overthrowing these tyrants. But as long as he's not taking on the kinds of risks that they take on and would have to take on to remove these murderers from power, I don't think he's in any position to judge them. I just, anything else you want to add to that, Karim?
Well, I think you touch on a very important point, and that is all these autocrats that are pro-Western. What people often forget to consider, and this is such an important point that in anti-imperialist spheres really needs much more attention, and that is that we are up against a structural machine that is so incredibly powerful. And what do we usually do? We individualize the blame. So we focus on the Palestinians, or we focus on certain factions in resistance groups, etc., etc. But the United States, and especially as a country that has the dollar as a reserve currency, has so much power that it can fund literally everything from color revolutions to HTS to vassal states to media outlets like CNN or even Al Jazeera. It has money like water to fund imperialism, let alone all these military bases. Mm-hmm. So you have a country, you have a nation that has so much money that it can literally control society, control countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, you name it.
It's all around the world.
That is all around the world, and that is a structural power that these very poor resistance groups in West Asia are up against. And then you say that the problem is a lack of unity of them. Whilst they, on so to speak, on flip-flops, are fighting the most powerful empire in the world that has money to fund imperialism on all levels. I mean, we had a show with Michael Hudson, who tried to explain how that works, how the rest of the world is paying for the imperialism of the United States by through the use of the dollar as a trade currency. And this is so important to understand, instead of like keeping the discussion on the surface level. Oh, it's Hezbollah, it's this resistance group, it's that. Oh, they leave them, it's Iran. No, there is such a powerful machine that people are up against, and if we keep blaming like these surface level groups, we are actually playing the game of imperialism. We are actually engaging in the divide and conquer that keeps people divided. So To wrap up, what I'm trying to say is that we need, in my opinion, a more structural focus on what we are up against instead of putting the blame on individuals. What do you think, Dimitri?
100%. The only thing I have to add to that, excellent observation is that the people who are best positioned to stop, Israel likes to refer to Iran as the head of the snake. The true head of the snake is the U.S. oligarchy and the government in Washington, which it controls. That's the head of the snake. And the people who are best positioned to stop this are Americans themselves, the people who have the right to vote, the people who have the right to finance or not finance political campaigns. And when they were presented with an opportunity recently to remove from power this genocidal, lunatic, psychopath, zombie, Joe Biden, with whom did they replace Biden? Trump. Yeah. The man who's out there now, just basically like a bull in the china shop, destroying trade relationships, telling the Palestinians that if they don't release all the hostages, we're going to come back to this in a moment.
And not just that. Sorry for interrupting, Dimitri, but not just that. There was a significant amount of people in the anti-imperialist sphere who were celebrating Trump and the people that he was appointing, like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. All these figures who are imperialists.
100%. I totally agree. And so to our comrades in the United States, I think my message is take a look in the mirror. The primary responsibility for the conduct of the head of the snake is you, the American voters. And if you continue to put these people in office and empower them, you have no business condemning peoples in the global South who are unable, despite their valiant efforts, to overthrow these tyrants. So with that, Karim, I'd like to move on to a related subject, but not one that is peculiar to Scott Ritter. And that is the question of what is currently happening in West Asia.
And just while you're searching, let's also not forget, do we have unity in the West? So we are supposed to say to the people who are suffering under genocidal bombs that they need unity over there, whilst we in the West have unity. The United States is unified.
You could certainly say the same thing about Canada. The level of divisiveness we're now seeing in Canadian political discourse is off the charts. You could say this about France, about Germany.
Yeah.
You know, they're talking about, they've actually taken steps in European countries to squash when people do make a choice that the elites don't like, as in Romania. They just cancel the elections. You call that unity? I mean, in any event.
Yeah, but also liberals versus conservatives, Trumpists versus Kamala Hive and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's hardly any unity in the West. You know what I mean?
Yes, correct. So the subject I wanted to move to next is, the very question of these U.S.-backed regimes in West Asia and how they are responding to Trump's now notorious plan to, quote unquote, clean out Gaza. So I'm going to start actually with a meeting that took place between the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, and various Arab ambassadors within the past few days. In a meeting with representatives of Arab states, China's vice minister for foreign affairs stated that, quote, Gaza belongs to Palestinians and is an inseparable part of Palestinian territory. He also said that, quote, China has always firmly supported the legitimate national rights of the Palestinian people. Now, around the same time, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Nebenzia, unequivocally rejected Trump's proposal to remove Palestinians from Gaza. China and Russia are founding members of the BRICS, and they are increasingly influential militarily, economically, and politically in global affairs, and in particular in West Asia. And also, it bears pointing out that both Egypt and Saudi Arabia just became members of the BRICS. Now, as I'm sure you know, Karim, Sisi, the Egyptian president, and the Jordanian king, and the Saudi autocracy have all categorically rejected Trump's plan to clean out Gaza of Palestinians. In fact, the Saudi crown prince, even before Trump announced this, in November of last year, described what Israel is doing as a genocide. Al-Turki, the former head of Saudi intelligence, was just said in an interview with Christian Amanpour that Trump's plan is a mad ethnic cleansing plan. That's the language he used. Sisi, in a press conference, said it's out of the question that the Egyptian people would never accept us taking Palestinians forcibly displaced from Gaza. And of course, the Jordanian monarch has even gone so far as to suggest this could result in a declaration of war. So my question to you, Karim, is someone who's in, the People's Republic of China, who's close to, very familiar with the dialogue and the sentiments in the political discourse in China. Do you think we are now potentially in a different world because of the BRICS? Do you think it's possible that these Western-backed tyrants in West Asia who have repeatedly betrayed the Palestinian people might finally have reached the limits of their patience with American government arrogance and provocation, and now they have another game in town, they have another option, BRICS? What do you make of these statements that we're hearing from the Saudis and from the Egyptians and the Jordanian leaders about their opposition to this ethnic cleansing plan?
Yeah, that's difficult to say, to be very honest. I remember also Erdogan having great statements in the beginning and being severely disappointed by what happened. And I'm always disappointed by these leaders in West Asia when it comes to nice talk, but not a lot of action. I think a lot of these leaders in West Asia are just dependent on U.S. empire. So I think even though they talk the talk, I think the only reason why many of them are there is because of U.S. empire. So they rather see the Palestinians go than that they see the United States crumble. That's what I think. For somebody like, for example, Al-Sisi, or I would say the whole family, Al Saud family. I think these are all deeply intertwined with the United States. But of course, you have the population, and all of them are, of course, nervous about what may happen. I mean, there have been leaders shot for the way they engage with the Israel-Palestine issue, and I don't. I find it very. Yeah, exactly, and I find it very difficult to say. You do make a good point. There is a new player, and that is China, and you see slowly that China is encroaching, you could say, on West Asia, and the Chinese have a very different opinion about the Palestinian rights, and in fact, the Chinese have an opposite opinion about the Palestinian rights compared to the West. And I think that's a good thing, because China is the only contender. China is the only one who could possibly overtake the United States as the greatest power. Or like one of my guests said last week, Matt Kennard, he's a journalist, and he actually said that he actually thinks that China is the only chance that we have for the United States empire to fall, so to speak. But I must say, Dimitri, and I wonder what your opinion is about that. I am still a bit disappointed by the passivity of the you could say the BRICS bloc when it comes to a genocide. I find it's a very difficult discussion. My co-host Peter always said, if China does anything, they get the wrath of the empire. You know, like the United States will probably try and do everything to damage China. So China's playing the long game. That's what many people say. But in the face of such a horrendous genocide, one would expect that the other major powers do more to make it stop. And so while China has a good opinion and good words, I'm still conflicted. I would have liked to see more. I would have liked China to cut diplomatic ties, to impose trade sanctions. I don't know. It doesn't need to be military. I'm not expecting anything militarily. But I did expect more to happen. Same with Russia, by the way. Russia always has very nice words, but I also think Russia just did not do enough. And in the end, it's all interests, that play a role. But I always wonder, when do we get at the point that the world, the geopolitics, stops being a cost-benefit analysis, and we start to act on our morals as human beings? That is really, because that's the discussion I always have with my co-host. He says, if China does that, if China does more, they have a problem. The United States will do horrendous things. But then I'm like, that is still a cost-benefit analysis. And after 16 months of a horrendous genocide, when do major powers stop engaging in cost-benefit analysis and they start to act on our morality as human beings? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I completely share your disappointment. And I'll tell you about an interaction I had, Karim. Late last year, I had the opportunity to interview Russia's ambassador to Canada. We had a sit-down interview in the Russian embassy in Ottawa. And I asked him about the Russian Federation's policy towards Palestine, and specifically why Russia had not imposed sanctions on Israel. And he said, first of all, we don't supply Israel with weaponry. There's no flow of weapons coming from our country. So you could call that, I suppose, a form of sanction. But he said the real problem for us is that we have a commitment to the notion that sanctions are illegal and illegitimate unless they're approved by the United Nations Security Council.
Would you agree with me that more must be done, and that one way in which pressure can be exerted on Israel to finally give the people of Palestine a sovereign state would be economic sanctions of the type, for example, that have been leveled extensively by Western countries against Russia? Is that something that the Russian Federation has done, or would contemplate doing in the case of Israel, applying well-targeted economic sanctions? And if not, why wouldn't it do that in a situation where a country has a position of dominance over an indigenous population and is using it to violate their rights systematically? I would think this is a perfect case for economic sanctions, no?
Well, 2-3 things. First of all, we never believed in unilateral economic sanctions. We believe that sanctions can be only introduced by the decision of the UN Security Council. Secondly, we don't cooperate with Israel on technical military issues. We don't trade, we don't provide, we don't buy. So there are no military cooperation.
So it's like a de facto arms embargo, basically.
Well, if you want to put that way,
Right.
yes, but we just don't do that.
Right.
Couple of more things. Probably third of population of Israel people from Russia, former Soviet Union. So they are our compatriots, if you want to put it that way. And secondly, Russia have been playing a mediating role in the Middle Eastern settlement for decades, since the creation of Israel and Palestine, and we want to be able to communicate freely, both with Israel and support and support our Palestinian friends as well. In this role, we need to be more diplomatic, I would say, without any harsh moves. However, we understand where the moral compass shows today. Right?
Understood.
And now, as a country that has been on the receiving end of wave after wave of unilateral Western imposed and very hypocritical sanctions, I understand the Russians' position. I suspect this also explains to a large degree the position of the Chinese government. But in my opinion, as a lawyer, under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, these states have an obligation to impose economic measures on Israel, notwithstanding the United Nations Charter. They have an obligation to prevent genocide, and this overrides any requirement under the UN Charter that they seek UN Security Council approval of sanctions, and especially in circumstances where we all know that the United States, Britain, and France, one or all of them, would exercise their veto to prevent Israel from being sanctioned by the UN Security Council. They have an obligation to act. So whether they'll do that in the future, I think remains to be seen. I do think asking them to intervene militarily is probably not a good idea, because after all, we're talking about nuclear armed states, the United States and Israel, and they're crazy. Their leaders are criminally insane. So probably that would be a bridge too far, but economic sanctions, absolutely, they should do that. My question, however, Karim, is let's take it as a given that, however disappointing we may find it, they're not likely to be imposing severe sanctions on Israel, right? My question is, because China has the economic and political and military heft that it now has, and also Russia's military, political, and economic heft are on the rise as well. These autocrats, who I readily grant aren't concerned about the fate of the Palestinian people, they've proven that over and over again, they're now weighing up the risk of being overthrown, of a social explosion in their own countries if they are seen to be collaborating with the expulsion of millions of Palestinians from their homeland, against the pain. And there's a certain level of pain that the U.S. can impose upon them, but they can replace the economic costs or mitigate the economic costs to their own regimes by pursuing better relations with China. China is already the largest trading partner of Saudi Arabia. So it's already making a bigger contribution economically to the Saudi economy and the wealth of the Saudi autocracy than the United States. Now, the U.S. has military bases all over Saudi Arabia. That's an obvious problem and concern, I'm sure, for the Saudi autocracy. But there is another option available to them which would enable them to mitigate whatever pain the United States tries to impose upon them if they don't take a step which would threaten the very existence of their own regimes. So that's the kind of calculus I think they might be going through. So it's not that I trust them to protect the Palestinian people. I absolutely don't. It's their own sense of self-preservation that I think might be, hopefully, at the end of the day, will cause them to stand firm and to say, no, we will not accept 2 million Palestinians or however many Palestinians you're going to forcibly displace from Gaza. I mean, do you think that we might be in that kind of a world now where they'll suddenly, I'm not saying they're going to sanction Israel, but they just may say, look, we're not going to support this plan and we're not going to accept these displaced Palestinians?
I hope so. Dimitri. I'm more of a pessimist. I've been disappointed too often in the past years when it comes to the multipolar world and BRICS and et cetera, et cetera. I hope so. I want nothing more. But when I saw the whole situation with HTS in Syria and I saw Pezeshkian and Iran and suddenly the kind of passivity there and the no Russia, no China. I just don't know how to see it. And I do believe that if these countries think that they have an alternative, there is a chance that they will go towards they will go into the China route, so to speak. But yeah, don't underestimate the power of the United States. It has there's so much money, and don't forget it. The United States and Saudi Arabia are running media channels all over West Asia. They can control the narrative and rile up new ethnic tensions, and as long as China and Russia do not have an answer also to that kind of narrative dominance of the United States, I don't see a lot of change. I think that is also something that the BRICS bloc needs to work on to counter that imperial narrative that we see. It's so powerful and it riles up ethnic tensions everywhere and sectarian tensions everywhere. And as long as they have that kind of control, I think they run the show, to be very honest.
Right. Now, I totally understand your skepticism and your pessimism. I'm not sure how this is all going to play out, but of course, it wouldn't surprise me at all to witness yet another betrayal of the Palestinians by these Western-backed autocrats. Having said that, however, whether Israel can, practically speaking, accomplish its goal is another question altogether, because there is fierce resistance within Gaza itself. And I mean, they didn't even secure Beit Hanun, for God's sakes. After 15 months of genocide, the Israelis, they had to, this little corner of northeastern Gaza near the Israeli settlement of Sderot. You would have thought they could at least clear out the Palestinian militants from that part of Gaza, but they couldn't after 16 months. In the last week or two leading up to the ceasefire, they actually experienced a sudden spike in casualties, the Israeli genocidal military. So I don't know exactly what planet these people live on. If they think they're just going to bring some boat up to the shore of Gaza and, all these millions of Palestinians are just going to walk onto these ships and sail off into the sunset. No, there's going to be a brutal war to the death. And I am very skeptical that this is a fight that the Israeli military can win. They can certainly kill a lot more people. Tragically, that is true. But whether they can forcibly displace the Palestinian population, I don't see it. The question is, how much killing will they do before they finally realize that this plan is not practically implementable? In any event, what is your read, Karim, since we're on the subject of the Palestinian resistance? If it comes to this, right? If the Saudi autocrat, the Egyptian and the Jordanian puppets, they ultimately say, okay, we're going to play ball with Trump. How do you think groups like Hezbollah, Ansar Allah, and most importantly, because of its military strength, the Iranian government are going to respond?
Yeah, again, I don't have a glass ball, but
what's your sense?
Iran,
always...
I must say.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Oh, I said Iran is something is a question mark for me. I have no idea how that is going now under Pezeshkian. Iran seems to be very much in the background all of a sudden. I also don't think that Trump can pull this off. It's amazing how Trump just speaks about ethnic cleansing as if it's just fixing your car or something. It's completely devoid of any humanity and morality. I think it's fine. We're finally at the stage in the world that we can finally see the West for what it is. What you see Trump saying here and the journalists all asking about the logistics, not even questioning the morality of everything, just asking about the logistics. I think we are finally seeing the true face of the colonial West. So in that sense, I think we have a major improvement, because this is going to activate activism, which is sorely lacking in the West. There's just such we have been so propagandized in the West with a media system, education system, everything, that a lot of people, we have been so amazingly propagandized that we live in a part of the world where we are the most propagandized people on earth who think they are the freest. That is the most amazing part of the West.
Yeah, Karim, I totally agree. Like you, I spent a lot of time in the non-Western world. I concluded some time ago that the Western populations are the most propagandized on God's green earth. But sorry, I totally agree. Yeah.
And I am teaching Chinese students, and what they know about history, what they know about colonialism, what they know about the Palestine conflict, what they know is so much better than what we know in the West, or at least what we know when we come out of high school or start studying at the university, and that we still have the arrogance to know everything better, and that we are free. And in other parts of the world, like China, people don't know anything because they are not free. And we have to teach them this. When that gets back to that whole Twitter comment from Ritter, we know better. I mean, we are so incredibly propagandized. And like I said, I think we are now finally living in the mask off moment, not for the global South, not for people in China or West Asia or Africa or Latin America. No, we're finally living in a mask off moment for our own people, for Westerners, because we literally thought that we live in a part of the world where everything's free and human rights. But it's the other way around. It's the rest of the world who has more humanity than we do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
sorry, I'm a bit digressing, but
no, not at all. This is actually very, very important. It's seeing the unadorned depravity of the White House is refreshing in a horrifying sort of way. It was so much more maddening to listen to Biden express sympathy and Kamala Harris and Bill Lincoln, those poor Palestinians who got to help those Palestinians. And by the way, here's a bunch of 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs so you can blow up Palestinian children. It was sickening to see the hypocrisy and the dishonesty. There's no longer any doubt about what the United States, as you said, what the United States and Western governments stand for. And the really horrifying part of this for me is that even though the mask has been torn off, to a degree we've not experienced in our lifetimes, there's still a substantial part of the population in every single Western country that supports these lunatics. What will it take, for God's sakes, to wake these people up? Are they this brainwashed that even when Trump openly declares that he's going to ethnically cleanse Gaza, they go, yeah, I wonder how long that's going to take, and maybe should we do it by ships, or should we open up a land bridge into, there's absolutely no, I don't know whether it's a majority, but certainly a substantial minority of the populations of Western countries continue to be drinking the Kool-Aid even now. That's a
and I think also that has to do, Dimitri, and we talked about that last time. I also wrote about that on my Substack, on a piece on Islamophobia, is that we in the West have, of course, that conditioning system, that propaganda system. And we have been conditioned also. We come from extremely racist cultures. We're conditioned since we are very young with very racist conception of the world, through Hollywood movies, Netflix, news programs, education. We're continuously bombarded with the fact that in the West everything's better, and those savages around the world, they only make war and they're terrorists. And it has gotten to a point in the West that a lot of people are just unaware of how racist they are, and not consciously. I usually don't blame. I'm not the type of person, as a psychologist myself, I'm not the type of person to say like, racism is usually intentional. In fact, most racism is not intentional. Most racism is cultural. It's culturally conditioned in such a way that you don't even realize that you're racist. And that is a major problem that we have in the West. And that's why I always say anti-imperialist spheres in the West really need to start tackle racism as a central component of imperialism. This needs to be way more centrally analyzed, because the way we deal with Palestinians, 16 months of brutal, visible genocide, utter depravity, rape, murder, burning people alive, torture, you name it.
Shooting children in the head.
Yeah. Shooting children in the head. You hear the phone calls of a 6-year-old. And then still, until today, masses of people defending that stuff or saying these memes, release the hostages. And you must have been conditioned with such a deep, deep racist mindset that you can still deny the humanity of these victims. And again, that brings us to what we just talked about with Donald Trump. The way he speaks about, we're just going to make it a nice place, Riviera on the beach and all that kind of stuff. And these people, we move them out. Just playing for God. Just playing for God, moving people out like they're product. That's a racist mindset that's deeply rooted in our cultures. And that is the result of 500-600 years of colonialism. The racism does two things. It kills two times. It kills its victims, and it kills the humanity of those who are racist. You know what I mean?
Well said, brother. Well said. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Karim. And I look forward to our next conversation after we get greater insight into how the Arab world is going to respond to Trump's ethnic cleansing plan. I'd like to have you back on Reason to Resist so we can revisit these profoundly important issues.
Definitely, and we got to have you back too. So,
thank you. And this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on February 11th, 2025.